Hello everyone, this is the second part of our ongoing app project, which is COVID-19 data tracker, and we are building this app in BLoC pattern. In the previous part we have created this data source which actually return us two types of data, and today let's create the repositories. So create a folder inside data folder, repositories, because we may have multiple repositories, but for now let's create the single one, which is corona repository dot dirt. Okay, now the task of this repository is just like a bridge between the data source and the inner part of our app, which is blocks. So let's create a class here. And just like the data source, we're gonna have similar type of methods here, function. So a function which will return us the corona summary, and name it as fetch corona summary. Okay, sorry, future. Okay, and similarly another function for getting the list of countries, list of corona country, fetch corona countries. Now as it is a link between the data source and the other objects, the other part, which is BLoC, so we need to have an instance of the data source here. So let's create an instance of corona data source, and let's initialize it inside the constructor. Corona data source. Okay, and then using that instance you're gonna fetch the appropriate data, get corona summary, and we can simply return it. Let's await here as well. Okay, and similarly we can return the list of corona countries as well using the data source instance, data source dot get corona countries. Okay, so simple. That's all about this repository. So our repository part is done. Okay, so inside the data layer we have data source, which is done, and then the models are done as of now, and the repository, that's also done. Now let's move on to the blocks folder. What types of blocks we don't need, and if you can remember that I showed the app in the previous part, we will have two tabs. The first tab will just fetch the summary, and then the second tab will fetch the list of the countries. So as soon as the app gets started, it will try to fetch the summary. So for that, let's create a block which is corona summary block, And as you all know, we need 3 types of files for a single block, and if you don't know about that, I have created some videos on BLoC. You can check that out. So first we need the event file corona summary event.dart, and then we need the state file. And the third one is for the block itself. Let's create the event first. So what will be the event? I can think about a single event here, because as soon as the app gets started, it will try to fetch the summary data. So let's create the event for that. So let's create an abstract class for the event. Corona summary event, which is going to extend the equatable, which is for value equality. And then we may need to use it, and then create the event fetch corona summary event, which is going to extend the corona summary event. Yeah, and we don't need any extra field here inside the event. Now let's think about the states. We need to have an initial state. Initially we're gonna show a loading indicator, so a loading indicator, a state for loading, and then the fetching of the data may be success or may be failure. There may be several reasons for failure, so 2 more states for success and failure. So we have 3 states. I can think about 3 states here: one for loading, one for success, and then another one for the failure. So let's create those states, and first of all let's create the abstract class corona summary state, which is going to extend the equatable as always. And then let's create the states corona loading state, which can extend corona summary state. And similarly, one is corona summary loaded, and then last one corona summary failure. So these are the 3 states you can think about. And also, apart from these states, we can create another state for initial. As you all know, the block takes an initial state. I'll show it later. We can show the loading state as the initial state, but let's have a separate state. We may show something else, maybe a splash screen. So corona summary initial. Just overwrite a method which is for extending the equatable class. And when the state is the loaded state, then we need to have an object corona summary. So let's have an object corona summary, and also let's import a package which is meta.dart. Meta.dart. This one is to use the required keyword, just like this. We are making this field required. Okay, and then override the method for equatable. And finally, a state for the failure. If it fails, we want to show a message here, reason of failure. Okay, that's all about the corona summary states, 4 states here. And then create the block. First let import the block.dart, and then import the meta as well, we may need it. Okay, and okay, create the class corona block. Oops. Corona block, which can extend the block, and inside type parameter we need to specify 2 things. First one is the event, and then the second one is the state. So event here is corona summary event, and then corona summary state. And of mandatorily we need to override 2 functions. One is initial state, and then another one is map event to state. This is the reason why we created a separate state here, and of course we could use this state, loading state as well. Okay, let's return the initial state here, corona summary initial, and then map event to state. What it does is that it takes an event, as you can see here, it takes an event and then return appropriate states for that event. It converts the event and then return us the states, appropriate states. So we may have several events, but now in this particular block we have a single event, which is what's the name, corona summary event. Though we don't need to check it because we have a single event, but we may later we may add more event. So if the event is corona summary event, then so if this is the event, then we're gonna return us some states. So for that, let's create we can simply return the states from here, but think about a situation where we have multiple events, then this function may get messy. So for that, to overcome that messiness, we're gonna create separate function for events. Now let's create a function which will return states for the corona summary event. Stream of state, I'd rather say stream of corona summary event, and let's name it as map corona summary event to state. It's a big name, corona summary event to state. Okay, now what is the task of this function? Let's pass an event here. Corona summary event. Oops, just a minute, I have broken the code, just deleted and curly brace. So have an event here. The name of our event was fetch corona summary event. Okay, we may remove this event here, fetch corona summary, that's more simple. Okay, so this function is expecting a fetch corona summary event, and we need to use a async static keyword because it will return stream. So initially it will yield the loading state, so we can simply yield the corona summary. Am I making some spelling mistake? Probably. Corona loading state. I should put this summary word here. So corona summary loading state. What's wrong? Oops, I don't know what's went wrong. Let me check. Okay, I'll check it. Then initially it will show us the loading state, and then we need to use a try catch block because the fetching of the data may go wrong. So for that we are using this catch block. We will handle the exception here. So to get the data, we need an instance of the repository. So let's have an instance here, corona repository, and we're going to use this repository to fetch the data. So let's first initialize this repository inside the constructor. Corona repository, initializing it, not making it required. Also we can do this here just like this. You can make it a required field inside the constructor, and we can get the repository from the above. Okay, let's do it now. Or else we can initialize the repository simply from here. Now we are expecting the repository from above. Okay, now inside the try block, let's use that repository, corona repository dot fetch corona summary. Okay, so corona repository dot summary, let's put it in a variable corona summary, and we can await here. Okay, and then we can yield the state now, which is for the success corona loaded state. Is it? I always forget the name of the state. Corona summary loaded. And then here something went wrong, I will check that. And then here it will take a corona summary object. So corona summary, I will check the error later. And finally, if there is any error, then we will yield the error state, which is corona summary failure. Okay, these are the three states we are yielding here. Initially the loading state, and then the loaded state if it is successful, and then the failure state if something go wrong. Now let me check what actually wrong here. So the wrong was here, we accidentally returning the event, but that's not at all, that's a typing mistake. We are actually returning the corona summary state, right? That was the wrong here. So that's the function which will convert the fetch corona summary event into the states. And then now we need to yield this state from here. Yield, where is this? Yeah, yield this function. Okay, again I have done wrong. This is here. So if the event is corona summary event, then yield this one and pass the event. Okay, finally it is done. And as you can see here, returning stream of corona summary state. So for that I am using this yield asterisk, and as we are using this yield, of course we need to use the async asterisk here. So that's all about the BLoC, corona summary block. So in this part we have created the repository. Our repository is done, and then we need to have two blocks, one for getting the summary and then another one for getting the list of the countries. And the summary block is done. We are only a single event. That event will be fired as soon as the app gets started, and then we have 4 different states for that particular event. And inside this BLoC class we are actually mapping the event into the state. So that's all from this video. In the next video I will create the other block, and till then have a good night.